back. Now, in March 2021, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group and the Open Society Initiative for West Africa launched the Debt Management Roundtable to help Nigeria and West African countries provide a pathway to fiscal sustainability. Nigeria's debt to gross domestic product ratio increased over the years, but the relationship between both keeps rising with the nation's inability to service our debt, especially given that about 83% of the country's revenue is spent on debt servicing. The Debt Management Roundtable is believed to help provide alternatives and recommendations that the government can apply to ensure that Nigeria's debt is properly managed. Well, I introduced him earlier. Let's discuss the issues, challenges, and prospects of the DMR. And joining me to do this is a researcher, Debt Management Roundtable, Mr. Sodik Olofin. Good afternoon, Mr. Olofin.
Yeah, good afternoon.
And thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Now, let me start this way. What is the DMR research all about? Give us an insight, proper insight into this.
Well, thank you for having me once again. Like you said in your introduction, the debt situation in the ECOWAS region, beyond just Nigeria, has been on the rise, which is also the trend in the global economy. However, the rate at which it is rising in Nigeria is quite alarming, given the pace, the size, and the structure of the debt accumulation in Nigeria and other ECOWAS countries. This situation is further worsened by the spread of the coronavirus that governments across the world have to borrow, inclusive of ECOWAS country and Nigeria. So the debt situation skyrocketed in 2020. So given this situation, many countries are now in a condition or a situation where they have to borrow to service their debt or accumulate such debt servicing as another debt. So because of this situation, we anticipate that if the trend continues in this direction, there is an imminence of a debt overhang or a debt crisis in the future for most ECOWAS countries. As a result, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group and the OCWA come together to form the Debt Management Roundtable to look into the issue, provide understanding, provide policy recommendations, and beyond recommendations, engage in advocacy to ensure that the government is able to implement policy recommendations that emanate from the research.
Very good way to start. But I would like to follow up by saying that what now are the issues and, of course, motivations for the DMR research?
Well, beyond just the problem of debt in the ECOWAS region and Nigeria in particular, we are trying to look deeper than just speaking to what the debt situation is in the country and trying to analyze the sustainability therein. So we are trying to take a deep dive, looking at some of specific issues around the debt situation in the region. For example, many of these countries over the last decade, 2006, 2007, 2008, during the period, they all received debt relief, one way or the other. However, just a decade over, many of these countries have increased their debt level in manifolds, like we have in Nigeria as at 2006 rather. The total public debt in Nigeria was 2.7 trillion, and we know what it is today, over 33 trillion. Likewise in Ghana, it was around $4.85 billion. But what we have as of 2019 was about $43 billion. So you see the rate at which the debt situation climax around these countries. There we are trying to look beyond just debt forgiveness or ability to reduce your debt, but what are the drivers of this debt in these countries? Beyond the drivers, governments have been saying that they want to borrow to support the economy, build infrastructure, and all of that. So we are trying to see a way of investigating what the impact of this debt has been on the macro space, given that the growth trajectory of most of these countries are divergent, and at the same time, most of these ECOWAS countries are susceptible to macro instability. So we want to see what it is what is the impact of debt that we have accumulated over the years on the economies of these countries. Beyond that, we are trying to see that over time we have seen, like you just mentioned, we have our debt service to revenue at over 80%. Over the first 5 months of this year, it was reported that it is 97% of revenue. Given this situation, and we still see government across the region, and especially among the less developed countries or low-income countries, so to say, still trying to emphasize the fact that some of them are still having debt to GDP ratio that is far below the IMF benchmark. So instead of us now standing on that position of low debt to GDP ratio relative to IMF benchmark, we are trying to see a way of harmonizing some of these indicators, like we have debt to GDP, external debt to GDP, external debt to export, debt service to export, debt service to revenue. We're trying to see a way of harmonizing these indicators, given that your debt is not serviced with GDP. Your debt is not serviced with exports. Your debt is not serviced directly with your reserve. Rather, it is the revenue that the government is making that we use to service the debt that we are owing. So we intend to create some divergence from the usual debt sustainability analysis, such that we harmonize all these indicators to be able to come up with an index that will speak to the situation of these countries together. And then we come up with a threshold for some of these countries to be able to ascertain whether some of them are in crisis or not. Beyond that, also, we are trying to look at a situation where if the debt situation leads us into a debt crisis, what would be the implication for other countries in the region? For example, given Nigeria's share of GDP in the region, share of debt in the region, and debt crisis in Nigeria has potential of leading to crisis in other countries. So we are trying to look into that. And at the same time, we're trying to look into providing actionable policy recommendations that will help the government manage the situation, and at the same time seek alternative measures as alternative ways to financing government projects. So those are the issues that we have.
All right. Now, but let's say so far, what would you really say the research would have to say about the debt situation? Well, we must talk about our country one way or the other, Nigeria, and of course, the ECOWAS region.
Yeah, Nigeria is the center point whenever you are talking about the region. So there is no how you are going to discuss ECOWAS situation without Nigeria. But based on some of the preliminary findings that we have, debt drivers in the region, or generally, is diverse across countries. You have so many different issues that are constituting drivers to debt. But what we notice is across these countries is that most of these countries have the tendency of always spending more than they earn. So, like for over the past decade, since 2009, all of ECOWAS countries, Nigeria inclusive, have been on persistent budget deficits. There has not been any year where any of these countries recorded any form of surplus. So this is general across ECOWAS countries. But beyond that, for Nigeria, we have other factors that are pertinent to Nigeria, factors such as the interest rate environment in Nigeria, exchange rate volatility. Interest rate, now we are talking about the cost of borrowing, which eventually translates into debt servicing, and at the same time translates into higher borrowing at the end of the day. Exchange rate volatility, we are always seeing depreciation of the Naira year in, year out. That's a way of influencing the value of our external borrowing. At the same time, we have the issue of dependence on oil. Anytime there is a negative oil shock, the government has no choice than to go to the capital market to borrow, to at least to placate the situation in the short term. And at the same time, we have the issue of resource costs, which is still part of our dependence on on oil price. So that's on the economic side. We have non-economic issues too, which is particularly the insecurity and insurgency situation in Nigeria. The government has been spending so much on issues around security to be able to ensure that we have security in the country. Well, beyond the drivers, we have not been able to establish that the debt accumulated over the years have translated to or have been supportive of growth in the region, given some of these inherent characteristics of these countries. We have issues around crowding out effect of government borrowing. It can be, for example, in Nigeria, the government cannot be borrowing at 14%, 15%, 17%, and you expect someone to now invest in the private sector where you are not sure of making profits in the next 3 years. So the crowding out effect is one of the drawbacks to the reasons why debt accumulation has not been supportive of growth. The leakages that we see with government management of resources, we have the resource cost as well, which is whenever there is problem with the oil market, you see a situation where government is not actually borrowing to spend on infrastructure, but government is borrowing to spend to save the situation. And we have the fragility of the economy, where insecurity is making it difficult for some of this borrowing to translate into economic growth. So on the other side as well, in terms of assessing the sustainability of debt across these countries, we found that majority of ECOWAS countries are in debt distress, which is supported by some of the IMF claim that says many of these countries are in high risk. That's based on our own assessment. We found that many of these countries are in high distress, given the fact that many of them are struggling with revenue, and debt is not serviced with GDP, debt is not serviced with export or whatever other indicator you are using. Debt is actually serviced with revenue. And any country that is having issues around their revenue to the tune of, in Nigeria, for example, we have it, like I mentioned earlier, 97% in the first 5 months of the year. In Ghana, it was 91% in 2019. It is worse in countries like Gambia, where they have 111% debt service to revenue. So what we are saying is that many of these countries are already in distress, but we are not yet, many of our current research are not yet reflecting that these countries are in problem. Also, in terms of the transfer of shocks to other countries, we found evidence that there could be a transfer of shock from Nigeria to most countries in the region. So that's basically what, those are the findings that we have for now, based on our preliminary results.
Beautiful, great stuff there, Mr. Olofin. Now, what policy implications now have become obvious from the research so far, as we almost wrap up this segment of the show?
Yeah, basically the policy segment of the research is, as we have it with the debt management roundtable, is designed to engage the core stakeholders in the economy to be able to fashion out actionable policy recommendations. But nevertheless, we have issues that are stand out in our research. It is sure that the countries need to curtail the rate at which they are borrowing to be able to go against the potential of we running into the problem of borrowing to service our debt. And at the same time, we get to a point where the only agenda of the government will be to manage our debt. So we don't want to get to that point where government will not be doing anything done. We want to manage our debt situation. And at the same time, our research have been able to show that we need to identify alternatives to borrowing for the government. And debt has reached a level where the government needs to do a sustainable analysis of the debt situation, and at the same time come up with actions that will be able to they will be able to use to manage the debt situation. And at the same time, as everybody has been saying, the ECOWAS countries need debt forgiveness but though not sufficient to solve the problem, at least it's going to be able to manage the situation in the short to medium term.
All right, finally, what efforts are in place to actualize policy recommendations from the DMR research? This is very important to me.
Yeah, the DMR is actually set up to adopt advocacy strategies to engage the government, to get the recommendations of the research implemented by the government. But beyond that, the DMR is working with core stakeholders in the economy, private, public, and development organizations to be able to create policies that will work towards ameliorating the situation of debt in Nigeria particularly. And at the same time, the DMR are looking into some stakeholders engagement events before the NESG summit next 27 that is coming up in October. We will look to organize stakeholder engagement to be able to create some policy recommendations that will help the government. And at the same time, the summit, there's a summit event that is targeted towards how we can, how the government can use alternative financing, such as PPP, social financing, and all of that, to be able to solve the debt problem in the region and the country in particular.
I must thank you so much. I've been speaking to researcher with Debt Management Roundtable Nigerian Economic Summit Group, Mr. Sodik Olofin. Thank you very much for making sense of this topic regards to how debt and all of that affects Nigeria and, of course, ECOWAS countries. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Ed.